So let's go from state actors to statehood. You're gonna have to do this one for me, because I know what I've been reading, that DC wants to now formally become the 51st state, but that it's not even going to get past the Senate. So you got to explain the process to me, how you go about how the government goes about recognizing a state for statehood. What are the constitutional issues in all of this, and what's the benefit of doing it? What are the constitutional issues, and what are the constitutional hurdles? Why do they say this is never going to succeed from the get-go?
So all you need to create a new state is to have the House and the Senate and the president sign it. But there are constitutional limits in certain contexts, and the big one in this context is the Constitution explicitly states the District of Columbia cannot become a state. So the way they try to get around this is they're going to say, well, we're going to pretend that the District of Columbia is only this tiny little portion of DC, and the rest of it's not really DC. It's just a new state we discovered. And that's their means of getting around it, which, by the way, would multiply. Not only would that would mean like about 100 people in a 3-block area would get 3 electoral votes. That's the consequence, because they had to amend the Constitution to even allow DC to have electoral votes because of the constitutional prohibition on DC having political representation. So the idea that they can circumvent the Constitution to create a state out of DC is just preposterous, and their means of doing so is just pretending that DC isn't really DC. It's only these 3 blocks right here, and everything else is a new free state. That clearly vitiates the constitutional purpose and principle behind the rule. So, and they're thinking because Alexandria used to be part of DC and they gave it to Virginia, but that was different. They weren't trying to create a new state out of what was part of DC. They were giving it to a pre-existing state. So that's totally different.
And I feel like a total idiot now because it might have just clicked. Is the entire political underpinning or the motivation of this to increase the electoral college and get electoral college votes from a state that is 90+% Democrat?
And to stack the Senate. They want 2 Senate seats. So that's their real goal. They want 2 new Senate seats from DC. And so so while they're busy thinking about how they could pack the court, they want to stack the Senate because they know that the Democrats have a disadvantage. Now, say historically, by the way, this tends to backfire. In the 1950s, Democrats and Republicans got together and said, okay, Democrats said, we want Alaska because, by golly, Alaska is going to be real Democratic. And Republicans said, well, we'll only let that happen if you give us Hawaii, because everybody knows Hawaii is going to be real Republican. And you can see how that turned out over time. So sometimes these things don't always work the way they want to. Like if you actually gave DC statehood, what's stopping a whole bunch of conservatives from just deciding to move to DC? Because it's not a big, it's a small enough state you could politically flip the electoral votes and the states and the United States senators just by moving there. So it's not clear this would have the intended effect that they think it will, but it just won't pass constitutional muster. You can't create a new state out of anything that is the District of Columbia under the Constitution, and without amending it. And so that's why constitutionally the DC statehood is dead. Now maybe the courts will all take a walk and all pretend the Constitution doesn't mean what it says, but on an issue like this, I don't think so. I think they would even recognize that you can't do what they're trying to do. Now, it probably will be filibustered in the Senate anyway, but because the senator from West Virginia wants to be governor of West Virginia, that's part of why even Biden's barely disguised bribery attempts to hire his wife for things and stuff like that is not going to work because Manchin wants to be governor of West Virginia. He's got big eyes. And so he's going to stick with the filibuster. So likely we'll send him up from Arizona because she thinks he's the Democratic McCain and wants to carve out that image. But independent of that, the problem with DC statehood and the reason why it's never become a state is because they all know there's a huge constitutional problem with trying to pretend they can make it a state.
Okay, well, first things first, I think I just noticed Vosh is in the house, which is definitely a new political leaning in the chat or in the comment and watching. Welcome. Well, here's the question, though. So the process that they're going for right now to recognize the state of DC, it's what is it? A bill in Congress that they're going to bring to the Senate?
It's already passed the House, so now it's over to the Senate,
and it's going to get.
So, I don't think it will pass the Senate. If somehow it passed the Senate and the White House signed it, I do believe a court will say no, you can't do this. Yeah, this can only be done by amendment.
And so then, in order to do it by way of constitutional amendment, we've talked about that before. But remind me what the process would be to amend the Constitution to authorize DC to become a state?
They have to get it through the House and the Senate and then a bunch of states, which will never happen.
Okay.
So that's why DC statehood's always been a pipe dream. Puerto Rico is more practicable, but the problem is a lot of Puerto Ricans don't want to be a state. Not only that, their whole tax code is designed about them not being a state, which all that problem, they have huge headaches financially and politically if they ever become a state. That's why there's no great surge from Puerto Rico to become a state.
What I was going to suggest after the state, if it becomes a state. Okay, no, I think that I understand. Okay, interesting. So when does the Senate vote on this?
If they ever do, I mean, it may just be filibustered or die a quiet death. We'll see. But it's pending before them now. But it tells you where their mindset is. They want to stack the Senate, pack the court, change the rules of the game, seize power. Much of what they're trying to do in the justice system and what they're trying to do in state employment and state universities, they're trying to do by changing the rules of the game itself. I mean, so much so that they are trying to get the courts to set aside the Florida riot laws on the grounds that there's a civil right to riot. Apparently.
Well, okay, so now, before we get there, because I do have my questions on that, having read the lawsuit, I don't know if they rendered any judgment on it. We'll get there in a second. If DC gets statehood, what is to stop House and Senate from discovering the new states of Pennsylvania, South Illinois, Central Valley, etc.? Where does the limit? I mean, where does the limit end? What would be the limit in recognizing new states?
I mean, really, it's just the House and other than DC, it's a unique issue. For every place else, it just requires the House, and if it's new territory, not part of an existing state, then just the House and the Senate and the White House. If it's part of an existing state, you have to get the consent of the existing state. So you could create kind of Northern California, Central. So if they wanted to play games, that may be the next place they go to find Democratic governors that are willing to split up their own state in order to stack the Senate because they believe they could create 5 Democratic states within one. But they also know they're going to create a problem that's going to create a lot of backlash across the rest of the country. So how much you can sustain that and survive that is an open question.